Russia, NATO, and Operation Gladio. Welcome to the Richie Brown Show, and today I'm discussing NATO's secret armies, Operation Gladio, and terrorism in Western Europe, written by Danielle Ganser. I'll be doing a book reading and a commentary. It's written from a bit of a liberal perspective, so I'll be making commentary on where I think liberal bullshit is snuck in to alter your perception of history. Let's get into it. Forward. At the height of the Cold War, there was effectively a front line in Europe. Winston Churchill once called it the Iron Curtain and said it ran from Szczecin on the Baltic Sea to Trieste on the Adriatic Sea. Both sides deployed military power along this line in the expectation of a major combat. The Western European powers created the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, precisely to fight that expected war, but the strength they could marshal remained limited. The Soviet Union, after the mid-1950s, the Soviet bloc, consistently had greater numbers of troops, tanks, planes, guns, and other equipment. This is not the place to pull apart analysis of the military balance to dissect issues of quantitative versus qualitative or rigid versus flexible tactics. Rather, the point is that for many years, there was a certain expectation that greater numbers would prevail and the Soviets might be capable of taking over all of Europe. Now, that is basically a liberal bullshit. NATO itself was created to contain Russia. During World War II, they had Operation Unthinkable, written up by Winston Churchill, was to rearm the Nazis and invade Russia in 1943. So this constant war of NATO against Russia has gone on for a long time. NATO effectively invaded Russia in 1918 under 14 armies that invaded Russia, went in on the White Army, went on the side of the White Army. You read history books, there's like a paragraph written about it in various history books for 14 armies invading Russia for 2 years. It's insane. But that's how liberal propagandists work. I'll quickly flick to Collier's Weekly. So this was October 1951 this was written, and it's a big article, about 100 pages in the magazine. It's titled "The Preview of the War We Do Not Want." Now, in this, they have a United Nations military occupation of Russia. And this is written a year after the Korean War, which was a United Nations war to divide up Korea and have the United Nations occupy it. So as you can see the UN flags there on over Moscow, and in the top right you can see Russia's defeat and occupation, 1952, 1960. So the article's written from a kind of a future perspective of when they've conquered Russia or conquered the Soviet Union, and they've raised the UN flag over Moscow. Now, let me just get to it. Now, if you go to the article, you see that, and I'll read the caption for you there. It says, "The bomb strikes Moscow in retaliation for heavy attacks on UN cities. Seconds later, Kremlin, within enclosure in foreground, was swept into oblivion. Red Square surrounding Avenue was heaped with rubble. St. Basil's Church, bulbous towers at right, was gone." Now, what you're seeing there is a nuclear inferno of Moscow City. And this was their plan to basically impose their will on the Soviet Union. This would basically be staved off by their failure during the Korean War from 1950 to 1953. They were unable to occupy Korea, and that war basically goes on till today. I had a look at the guy that wrote this intro, and he just sounds like a liberal bullshitter. John Prados is his name, and he was collaborating with the NSA. So he's probably a bourgeois historian put into power to write this kind of bullshit. But the rest is written by Danielle Ganser, and I'm sure he follows a typical liberal perspective. But I just want to put that into the point that at no point was the Soviet Union planning to occupy Europe. That's kind of revisionist history to explain Operation Gladio and the terrorism committed by NATO to basically ensure liberal rule on the European continent. All right, let's go back to reading. Planning for the day the Cold War turned hot. Given the expected Soviet threat necessarily led to thoughts of how to counter a Russian military occupation of Western Europe, that immediately suggested comparison with the Second World War, when resistant movements in many European countries had bedeviled Nazi occupiers. In 1939-1945, the anti-Nazi resistant forces had to be improvised. How much the better, reasoned the planners, if the entire enterprise could be prepared and equipped in advance. The executive agents in the creation of the stay-behind networks were the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, of the United States, and the Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, of the United Kingdom. And it's just another point here that in 1976, Harold Wilson was overthrown, and he was overthrown. He was a Labour Prime Minister of Britain. He was overthrown by both the CIA and the MI6. And Harold Wilson was just a social democrat. So it shows you how narrow the window they had for to make sure that Russia stayed an enemy, that socialism could never come to any Western European countries, that they all had to be basically under the boot heel of the United States and the United Kingdom. Not even those nations necessarily, more of the secret services and intelligence agencies to ensure a transnational global conglomerate basically ruled over all these countries. And you see that later with the Trilateral Commission, where they complain about there being too much democracy in Western nations. Okay, I'll continue reading. Other major actors include security services in a number of European countries. In all cases, identical techniques were used. The intelligence services made an effort to establish distinct networks for spying on the occupiers, that is, espionage, and for sabotage, or subverting an enemy occupation. To establish the networks, the CIA and others recruited individuals willing to participate in these dangerous activities, often allowing such initial or chief agents to recruit additional sub-agents. Intelligence services provided some training, placed caches of arms, ammunition, radio equipment, and other items for their networks, and set up regular channels for contact. The degree of cooperation in some cases ranged up to the conduct of exercises with military units or paramilitary forces. The number of recruits for the secret armies ranged from dozens in some nations to hundreds or even thousands in others. The resistance example was always an obvious one. Observers of the secret Cold War assume the existence of the networks, so there are occasional references to the stay-behind networks in spy memoirs and literature. But by and large, the subject was acknowledged with a wink and a nod, until almost the end of the Cold War. In the summer of 1990, after the collapse of Soviet-dominated regimes in Eastern Europe, but prior to the final disintegration of the Soviet Union, the Italian government made public the existence of such a network in that country. Over the years, since there has been a recurrent stream of revelations regarding similar networks in many European nations, and in a number of countries there have been official investigations. For the first time in this book, Daniel Ganser has brought together the full story of the networks the Italians came to call Gladio. This is a significant and disturbing history. The notion of the project in the intelligence services undoubtedly began as an effort to create forces that would remain quiescent until war brought them into play. Instead, in country after country, we find the same groups of individuals or cells originally activated for the wartime function beginning to exercise their strength in peacetime political processes. Sometimes these efforts involved violence, even terrorism, and sometimes the terrorists made use of the very equipment furnished to them for their Cold War function. Even worse, police and security services in a number of cases chose to protect the perpetrators of crimes to preserve their Cold War capabilities. These latter actions resulted in the effective suppression of knowledge of Gladio networks, long after their activities became not merely counterproductive, but dangerous. Mining evidence from parliamentary inquiries, investigative accounts, documentary sources, trials, and individuals he has interviewed, Ganser tracks the revelation of Gladio in many countries and fills in the record of what these networks actually did. Many of their accomplishments were in fact anti-democratic, undermining the very fabric of the societies they were meant to protect. Moreover, by laying the records in different nations side by side, Ganser's research shows a common process at work. That is, networks created to be quiescent became activists in political causes as a rule, and not as an exception. Now, here he's making it sound like bourgeois democratic view that you live in a pure democracy and that you're not in a class war against a bourgeois class. Shows him as somewhat confused and befuddled as to all these things happening. But no, this is how the ruling class rule in bourgeois democracies. It's a class war. The bourgeois rule. They put their finger on the weighing machine every time. No doubt about it. Deep as Dr. Gansers' research has been, there is a side to the Gladio story he cannot yet reveal. This relates to the purposeful actions of the CIA, MI6, and other intelligence services. Because of the secrecy of government records in the United States, for example, it is still not possible to sketch in detail the CIA's orders to its networks, which could show whether there was a deliberate effort to interfere with political processes in the countries where Gladio networks were active. There were real efforts carried out by Gladio agents, but their controllers' orders remain in the shadow, so it is not yet possible to establish the extent of the US role overall in the years of the Cold War. The same is true of MI6 for Great Britain and for security services elsewhere. At a minimum, Dr. Gansers' record shows that the capabilities created for straightforward purposes as part of the Cold War ultimately turned to more sinister ends. Freedom of information in the United States provides an avenue to open up government documents, but that process is exceedingly slow and subject to many exemptions, one of which is intended precisely to shield records on activities of this type. The United Kingdom has a rule that releases documents after a certain number of years, but there is a longer interval required for documents of this type, and exceptions are permitted to government when documents are finally released to the public. So they're basically waiting for everyone to die that was involved, and then they'll release the documents like 100 years later when it's no longer relevant and no longer has an impact on the political processes in our country. The information superhighway is barely a macadam path when it comes to throwing light on the truth of the Gladio networks. In this age of global concern with terrorism, it is especially upsetting to discover that Western Europe and the United States collaborated in creating networks that took up terrorism. In the United States, such nations are called state sponsors and are the object of hostility and sanction. Can it be that the United States itself, Britain, France, Italy, and others who should be on the list of state sponsors? The Gladio story needs to be told completely so as to establish the truth in this matter. Daniel Gansers has taken the critical first step down this road. This book should be read to discover the overall contours of Gladio and to begin to appreciate the importance of the final answers that are still lacking. Right, onto the introduction. As the Cold War ended, following judicial investigations into mysterious acts of terrorism in Italy, Italian Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti was forced to confirm in August 1990 that a secret army existed in Italy and other countries across Western Europe that were part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. Coordinated by the unorthodox warfare section of NATO, the secret army had been set up by the US Secret Service, Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, and the British Secret Intelligence Service, MI6 or SIS, after the end of the Second World War to fight communism in Western Europe. The clandestine network, which after the revelations of the Italian Prime Minister was researched by judges, parliamentarians, academics, and investigative journalists across Europe, is now understood to have been codenamed Gladio, the Sword, in Italy, while in other countries the network operated under different names, including Absalon in Denmark, ROC in Norway, and SDRA-8 in Belgium. In each country, the military secret service operated the anti-communist army within the state in close collaboration with the CIA or the MI6, unknown to parliaments and populations. So this was completely clandestine. No one knew anything about it, essentially. In each country, leading members of the executive, including prime ministers, presidents, interior ministers, and defense ministers, were involved in the conspiracy, or the Allied Clandestine Committee, sometimes also euphemistically called the Allied Coordination Committee, and the Clandestine Planning Committee, less conspicuously, at times also called Coordination and Planning Committee of NATO's Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers, Europe, and the acronym for that is SHAPE, coordinated the networks on the international level. The last confirmed secret meeting of ACC with representatives of European secret services took place on October 24th, 1990 in Brussels. As the details of the operation emerged, the press concluded that the story seemed straight from the pages of a political thriller. The secret armies were equipped by the CIA and the MI6 with machine guns, explosives, munitions, and high-tech communication equipment hidden in arms caches in forests, meadows, and underground bunkers across Western Europe. This is actually the same thing that happened in Hungary in 1956. There was armed caches all over Hungary, and they fled in. All these reactionary fascists fled in from Austria, and then took up arms. Leading officers of the secret network trained together with the US Green Berets Special Forces in the United States of America and the British SAS Special Forces in England. Recruited among strictly anti-communist segments of the society, the secret Gladio soldiers included moderate conservatives as well as right-wing extremists such as notorious right-wing terrorist Stefano Del Cial and Yves Guérin Serac. I'm butchering these pronunciations. In its strategic design, the secret army was a direct copy of the British Special Operations Executive, which during the Second World War had parachuted into enemy-held territory and fought a secret war behind the enemy lines. In case of a NATO invasion of Western Europe, the secret Gladio soldiers under NATO command would have formed a so-called stay-behind network, operating behind enemy lines, strengthening and setting up local resistant movements in enemy-held territory, evacuating shot-down pilots and sabotaging the supply lines and production centres of the occupation forces with explosives. Now, this is the official description of Operation Gladio. As you'll read through more of this book, basically, Gladio operated as a terrorist network within Europe, and they essentially built a strategy of tension, which was to ensure people were scared terrorists, because they often committed all these terror attacks pretending to be communists. So people would rush into the arms of conservatives at the wanton death of what they thought to be communists, but was actually fascists backed by NATO. Yet the Soviet invasion never came. Yeah, shock of that. The real and present danger in the eyes of the secret war strategists in Washington and London were the at times numerically strong communist parties in the democracies of Western Europe. Hence the network, in the total absence of a Soviet invasion, took up arms in numerous countries and fought a secret war against the political forces of the left. The secret armies, as the secondary sources now available suggest, were involved in a whole series of terrorist operations and human rights violations that they wrongly blamed on the communists in order to discredit the left at the polls. And now that is actually what Operation Gladio was about. It was about manipulating Western democracies, because a lot of the communists were very popular after World War II. You had the French communists, Italian communists almost won an election in 1948, 1949. So it was about essentially making the population of Europe more right-wing, that the entire of Europe would remain an appendage of the United States. The operation always aimed at spreading maximum fear among the population and ranged from bomb massacres in trains and market squares, Italy, the use of systematic torture of opponents of the regime, Turkey, and the support for right-wing coups d'etats in Greece and Turkey, to the smashing of opposition groups, Portugal and Spain. As the secret armies were discovered, NATO, as well as the governments of the United States and Great Britain, refused to take a stand on what by then was alleged by the press to be the best kept and most damaging political military secret since World War II. Chapter 1. A terrorist attack in Italy. In a forest near the Italian village Petiano, a car bomb exploded on May 31st, 1972. The bomb gravely wounded 1 and killed 3 members of the Carabinieri, Italy's paramilitary police force. The Carabinieri had been lured to the spot by an anonymous phone call. Inspecting the abandoned Fiat 500, one of the Carabinieri had opened the hood of the car that triggered the bomb. Anonymous call to the police 2 days later implicated the Red Brigades, a communist terrorist group attempting to change the balance of power in Italy at the time through hostage takings and cold-blooded assassinations of exponents of the state. The police immediately cracked down on the Italian left and rounded up some 200 communists. For more than a decade, the Italian population believed that the Red Brigades had committed the Petiano terrorist attack. It's pretty important here because you see what they killed. They killed their own people, discredit communists. Then in 1984, young Italian judge Felice Casson reopened the long-dormant case after having discovered with surprise an entire series of blunders and fabrications surrounding the Petiano atrocity. Judge Casson found that there had been no police investigation on the scene. He also discovered that the report, which at the time claimed that the explosive used in Petiano had been the one traditionally used by the Red Brigades, was a forgery. Marco Morin, an expert for explosives of the Italian police, had deliberately provided fake expertise. He was a member of the Italian right-wing organization Ordine Nuovo, and within the Cold War context contributed his part to what he thought was a legitimate way of combating the influence of the Italian communists. Judge Casson was able to prove that the explosive used in Petiano, contrary to Morin's expertise, was C4, the most powerful explosive available at the time, used also by NATO. I wanted that new light should be shed on these years of lies and mysteries. That's all, Casson years later told journalists in his tiny office in an 18th century courthouse on the banks of Venice's lagoon. I wanted that Italy should for once know the truth. On February 24th, 1972, a group of carabinieri had by chance discovered an underground arms cache near Trieste, containing arms, munitions, and C4 explosive identical to the one used in Petiano. The carabinieri believed that they had unveiled the arsenal of a criminal network. Years later, the investigation of Judge Casson was able to reconstruct that they had stumbled across one of more than 100 underground arsenals of the NATO-linked stay-behind secret army. That in Italy was codenamed Gladio, the sword. Now, shocking, over 100 underground arsenals. Casso found that the Italian military secret service and the government at the time had gone to great lengths in order to keep the Trieste discovery, and above all, its larger strategic context, a secret. As Casson continued to investigate the mysterious cases of Petiano and Trieste, he discovered with surprise that not the Italian left, but Italian right-wing groups and the military secret service had been involved in the Petiano terror. Casson's investigation revealed that the right-wing organization Ordine Nuovo had collaborated very closely with the Italian military secret service, SID. The Italians are going to hate me for this. I do apologize for all these pronunciations. Servizio Informazioni Difesa. Together they had engineered the Petiano terror and then wrongly blamed the militant extreme left, the Red Brigades. Judge Casson identified Ordine Nuovo member Vincenzo Vinciguerra as the man who had planted the Petiano bomb. Being the last man in a long chain of command, Vinciguerra was arrested years after the crime. He confessed and testified that he had been covered by an entire network of sympathizers in Italy and abroad who had ensured that after the attack he could escape. A whole mechanism came into action. Vinciguerra recalled that the Carabinieri, the Minister of the Interior, the Customs Services, and the military and civilian intelligence services accepted the ideological reasoning behind the attack. Vinciguerra was right to point out that the Petiano terror had occurred during a particularly agitated historical period, with the beginning of the Flower Power Revolution, the mass student protests against violence in general, and the war in Vietnam in particular. The ideological battle between the political left and the political right had intensified in Western Europe and the United States in the late 1960s. The vast majority of people engaged in the left-wing social movement relied on non-violent forms of protest, including demonstrations, civil disobedience, and above all, heated debates. In the Italian parliament, the strong communist party, the Partito Comunista Italiano, the PCI, and to a lesser degree, the Italian Socialist Party, the Partito Socialista Italiano, PSI, sympathized with the movement. They criticized the United States, the Vietnam War, and above all, the distribution of power in Italy. For despite their numerical strength in Parliament, the PCI was not assigned ministerial positions and hence was deliberately kept outside the government. Also, the Italian right knew that this was a blatant discrimination and a violation of basic democratic principles. So when you hear the bourgeoisie in all these countries talking about democratic rights and all the stuff that they whine about, you see is completely fake, because all through this period they were manipulating elections, making sure communists and socialists didn't have any power, and killing scores of people through right-wing terror attacks to like this. It was in this Cold War context and the battle for power in Western Europe that the extreme left and the extreme right resorted to terror. On the extreme left, the Italian Communist Red Brigades and Germany's Rote Armee Fraction, the RAF, were the two most prominent terrorist groups in Western Europe. Founded by students at the University of Trento with little to no military training, the Red Brigades included Margherita Kagel, Alberto Franceschini, and Alberto Curcio. Like the RAF, they were convinced that violence had to be employed in order to change the existing power structure that they perceived as unjust and corrupt. Like the RAF, the terror of the Red Brigades did not attack mass gatherings of the population, but very selectively targeted individuals whom they thought represented the state apparatus, such as bankers, generals, and ministers, whom they kidnapped and often assassinated. Operating above all in the 1970s, the death toll of the Red Brigades in Italy reached 75 people. And then, due to their limited military and strategic skills and experience, they were rounded up, arrested, tried, and imprisoned. On the other side of the Cold War spectrum also, the extreme right resorted to violence. In Italy, the network included secret Gladio soldiers, the military secret services, and fascist organisations such as Ordine Nuovo. Contrary to the terror of the left, the terror of the right aimed to strike fear to the bones of the entire society, and hence secretly planted its bombs among the population to kill large numbers indiscriminately in order to wrongly blame the communists. The Petiano terror, as Judge Cason found, belonged to this sort of crime and continued a sequence that had started in 1969. In that year, shortly before Christmas, 4 bombs had exploded in public places in Rome and Milan. The bombs killed 16 and maimed and wounded 80, most of which were farmers who, after a day on the market, had deposited the modest earnings in the Farmers' Bank on the Piazza Fontana in Milan. According to an evil strategy, the terror was wrongly blamed on the communists and the extreme left. Traces were covered up and arrests followed immediately. The population at large had little chances to find out the truth, as the military secret service went to great lengths to cover up the crime. In Milan, one of the deadly bombs had not gone off due to time of failure, but in an immediate cover-up, the bomb was destroyed on the scene by the Secret Service, while parts of a bomb were planted in the villa of a well-known leftist editor, Giacomo Feltrinelli. The official figures say that alone in the period between January 1st, 1969 and December 31st, 1987, there have been in Italy 1,591 acts of violence with a political motivation. Italian Senator Giovanni Pellegrino, president of Italy's Parliamentary Commission investigating the Gladio and the massacres, recalled the very violent period of Italy's most recent history. Good grief. It is maybe worth remembering that these acts have left behind 491 dead and 1,181 injured and maimed. Figures of a war with no parallel in any other European country. Following the Piazza Fontana massacre of 1969 and the Petiano terrorist attack of 1972, prominent massacres in Italy included a bomb which on May 28, 1974, exploded in Brescia in the midst of an anti-fascist demonstration, killing 8 and injuring and maiming 102. On August 4, 1974, another bomb exploded on the Rome to Munich train, Cialicus Express, killing 12 and injuring and maiming 48. The atrocities culminated on a sunny afternoon during the Italian national holiday when on August 2nd, 1980, a massive explosion ripped through the waiting room of the second class at the Bologna railway train station, killing 85 people in the blast and seriously injuring and maiming a further 200. The Bologna massacre ever since ranges amongst the largest terrorist onslaughts that Europe has seen in the 20th century. Contrary to the Red Brigades, who ended up in jail, the terrorists of the right mysteriously escaped after each massacre because, as Vinciguerra correctly pointed out, the security apparatus of the Italian state and the military secret services protected them. So this is how bourgeois democracy actually works. When you go vote at the polling station, it's meaningless. You know, when Jeremy Corbyn, you know, soft social democrat like him, come to power in the Labour Party, became leader, the military put out in the Telegraph an article saying that they would basically could do a military coup if Jeremy Corbyn came to power. As the Piazza Fontana terror was years later traced back to the Italian right, Ordine Nuovo member Franco Freda was questioned whether, in retrospect, he feels that powerful people high up in the hierarchy, including generals and ministers, had manipulated him. Freda, a declared admirer of Hitler who had published Mein Kampf in Italian in his own small publishing house, replied that according to his understanding, nobody can escape manipulation. The life of everyone is manipulated by those with more power. Right-wing terrorist Freda declared, "In my case, I accept that I've been a puppet in the hands of ideas, but not in the hands of men from the secret services here in Italy, or abroad. That is to say that I voluntarily fought my own war following the strategic design that came from my own ideas. That is all." In March 2001, General Giandanilo Meletti, former head of Italian counterintelligence, suggested that next to the Gladio secret army, the Italian Secret Service, and a group of Italian right-wing terrorists, the massacres which had discredited the Italian communists had also been supported by the White House in Washington and the US Secret Service CIA. At a trial of right-wing extremists accused to have been involved in the Piazza Fontana massacre, Meletti testified the CIA, following the directives of its government, wanted to create an Italian nationalism capable of halting what it saw as a slide to the left. For this purpose, it may have made use of right-wing terrorism. The impression was that the Americans would do anything to stop Italy from sliding to the left, the general explained, and added, "Don't forget that Nixon was in charge, and Nixon was a strange man, a very intelligent politician, but a man of rather unorthodox initiatives." In retrospect, the 79-year-old Meletti offered criticism and regret. "Italy has been dealt with as a sort of protectorate of the United States. I'm ashamed to think that we are still subject to special supervision." Already in the 1970s and 1980s, the Italian parliament, within which the communist and socialist parties controlled a large share of the power, had become increasingly alarmed by the fact that a seemingly endless chain of mysterious massacres shocked the country. Without that, the terrorists nor the people behind them could be identified, although rumours among the Italian left already at that time had it that the mysterious acts of violence represented a form of undeclared secret warfare of the United States against the Italian communists. The far-fetched theory could not be proven. Then in 1988, the Italian Senate established a special investigative parliamentary commission, presided by Senator Libera Gualtieri, under the telling name of Parliamentary Commission of the Italian Senate, for the investigation of terrorism in Italy, and the reasons why the individuals responsible for the massacres could not be identified: terrorism, the massacres, and the political historical contest. The work of the parliamentary investigation proved to be extremely difficult. Witnesses withheld testimony, documents were destroyed, and the commission itself, made up of the competing political parties from the Italian left and the Italian right, was split on what exactly the historical truth in Italy was, and disagreed on how many of its sensitive findings should be presented to the public. Judge Cason, meanwhile, from the testimonies of Petiano terrorist Vincenzo Vinciguerra and the documents he had discovered, started to understand the complex secret military strategy that had been employed. He gradually started to understand that he was not dealing with private, but with state terrorism. That's pretty important. State terrorism. That's what it was. Paid by tax money. Under the name strategy of tension, the massacres lined to create tension among the entire population. The right-wing extremists and their supporters within NATO feared that the Italian communists would become too powerful, and hence, in an attempt to destabilize in order to stabilize, the secret right-wing soldiers linked to the Gladio armies carried out massacres, which they blamed on the left. As far as the secret services are concerned, the Petiano attack is part of what has been called the strategy of tension. Judge Cason explained the strategy to non-experts in a BBC documentation on Gladio. That's to say, to create tension within the country to promote conservative, reactionary, social and political tendencies. While this strategy was being implemented, it was necessary to protect those behind it, because evidence implicating them was being discovered. Witnesses withheld information to cover right-wing extremists. Right-wing terrorist Vinciguerra, who, like others with contacts to the Gladio branch of the Italian military secret service, had been killed for his political conviction, related. "You had to attack civilians, the people, women, children, innocent people, unknown people far removed from any political game. The reason was quite simple. They were supposed to force these people, the Italian public, to turn to the state to ask for greater security. This is the political logic that lies behind all the massacres and the bombings which remain unpunished, because the state cannot convict itself or declare itself responsible for what happened." I mean, that's pretty shocking. All those murdered people just to ensure the victory of global liberalism. The monstrosity of the diabolic plan was only slowly being uncovered, and still took a great number of missing links remain. And still today, a great number of missing links remain. Above all, original documents are lacking. With the massacre of Petiano, and with all those that have followed, Vinciguerra explained on trial in 1984 the knowledge should by now be clear that there existed a real live structure, occult and hidden, with the capacity of giving a strategic direction to the outrages. The structure, he said, lies within the state itself. There exists in Italy a secret force parallel to the armed forces, composed of civilians and military men, in an anti-Soviet capacity, that is, to organise a resistance on Italian soil against a Russian army. Without giving the code name, this testimony revealed the NATO-linked Gladio secret stay-behind army. It is, Vinciguerra explained, a secret organisation, a super organisation with a network of communications arms and explosives, and men trained to use them. Vinciguerra disclosed that this super organisation, which, lacking a Soviet military invasion, which might not happen, took up the task on NATO's behalf of preventing a slip to the left in the political balance of the country. This they did with the assistance of the official secret services and the political and military forces. To be honest with you, I think that was the primary motive, was preventing a slip to the left politically and democratically, which could have happened across much of Europe after World War II. And I think all this nonsense about a Soviet occupation is just that, to give it cover. So when the documents finally came out, they could be like, oh yeah, but we were just aiming for trying to create stay-behind networks, and they got a bit out of hand. I mean, more than 2 decades had passed since right-wing terrorist Vinciguerra had offered this far-reaching testimony, which for the first time in Italy's history linked both the Gladio stay-behind and NATO directly to the terrorist massacres that the country had suffered from. Only now, years later, does a larger research public understand what Vinciguerra actually meant, as the existence of the secret stay-behind network has been confirmed and the arms and explosives been dug up. Is Vinciguerra thus a credible source? The events following the trial suggest that he is. The secret army was discovered in 1990, and in what amounted to an indirect confirmation that the right-wing terrorist had revealed the truth, Vinciguerra immediately lost all higher protection he had enjoyed during the previous years. In marked contrast to other right-wing terrorists that had collaborated with the Italian military secret service and walked free, Vinciguerra, after his revelations, was sentenced to life and imprisoned. But Vinciguerra had not been the first to draw the link between Gladio, NATO, and the massacres. He had not been the first to reveal the Gladio conspiracy in Italy. In 1974, the Italian investigating judge Giovanni Tamburini, in the course of his investigation into the right-wing terrorism in Italy, had taken the unprecedented step of arresting General Vito Micheli, the chief of the Italian military secret service, SID, on the charge of promoting, setting up and organising, together with others, a secret association of military and civilians aimed at provoking an armed insurrection to bring about an illegal change in the constitution of the state and the form of government. Micheli, previously responsible for the NATO Security Office, on trial on November 17, 1974, furiously revealed the existence of the Gladio army hidden as a special branch of the military secret service SID. A super SID on my orders, of course, but I have not organised it myself to make a coup d'etat. This was the United States and NATO who asked me to do it. With his excellent transatlantic contacts, Micheli got off lightly. He was released on bail and spent 6 months in a military hospital, forced by the investigations of Judge Casson. Prime Minister Andreotti, 16 years later, exposed the Gladio secret in front of the Italian parliament. This angered Micheli greatly. Shortly before his death in October 1990, he shouted, "I have gone to prison because I did not want to reveal the existence of this super-secret organisation, and now Andreotti comes along and tells it to parliament." In prison, Petiano bomber Vinciguerra explained to Judge Casson that not only Ordine Nuovo, but also other prominent Italian right-wing organisations such as Avanguardia Nazionale had cooperated with the military secret service and the Gladio secret army to weaken the political left in Italy. The terrorist line was followed by camouflaged people belonging to the security apparatus or those linked to the state apparatus through rapport or collaboration. I say that every single outrage that followed from 1969 fitted into a single organised matrix. Right-wing terrorist and Ordine Nuovo member Vinciguerra explained that he and his fellow right-wing extremists had been recruited to cooperate with the Gladio secret army to carry out the most bloody operations. Avanguardia Nazionale, like Ordine Nuovo, was being mobilized into the battle as part of an anti-communist strategy originating not with organizations deviant from the institutions of power, but from the state itself, and specifically from within the ambit of the state's relations with the Atlantic Alliance. Judge Casson was alarmed at what he had found. In an attempt to eradicate this rotten core of the state, he followed the traces of the mysterious Gladio underground army, which had manipulated Italian politics during the Cold War, and in January 1990 requested permission from the highest Italian authorities to extend his research to the archives of the Italian military secret service, Servizio Informazioni Sicurezza Militare, the SIS-MI, until 1971 known as SID. In July 1990, Italian Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti consented and allowed Judge Casson to research in the archives of Palazzo Braschi, the headquarters of the SIS-MI in Rome. It was inside Palazzo Braschi where Casson discovered the documents, which proved for the first time that a secret army codenamed Gladio existed in Italy as a sub-branch of the military secret service with the task to carry out unorthodox warfare. Moreover, Casson found documents that connected both the biggest military alliance of the world, NATO, and the world's only remaining superpower, the United States, to Gladio, subversion, and right-wing terrorists in Italy, and also other countries in Western Europe. This knowledge meant that Casson, for some time, was in serious danger, of which he was aware that Italian judges with too much knowledge had been shot in the streets of Italy before. From July until October 1990, I was the only one who knew something about Operation Gladio. This could have been unfortunate for me. As Casson survived the knot unravelled, based on the documents he had discovered, Casson contacted the Parliamentarian Commission, which under Senator Libero Gualtieri was investigating the massacres and terrorism. Gualtieri and his fellow senators were greatly worried by the findings which Casson had made, and agreed that the investigation into the Gladio secret army had to be included in the work of the commission, for it represented the key to both the massacres and the reasons why they had remained mysterious for so many years. On August 2nd, 1990, the senators ordered the head of the Italian executive, Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti, to inform the parliament within 60 days with respect to the existence, characteristics, and purpose of a parallel and occult structure which is said to have operated within our secret service of the military with the aim to condition the political life of the country. Now, he mentions the occult there. Now, Paul Williams wrote a book, Operation Gladio, the Vatican, and the CIA. And in that, he documents how a lot of Freemasonic lodges were tied in with the CIA and the Vatican that was washing money for the CIA. The next day, on August 3rd, 1990, Prime Minister Andreotti took a stand in front of the Parliamentary Commission and for the first time in Italy's post-war history confirmed as acting member of the Italian government that a NATO-linked secret security structure had existed in the country. Andreotti assured the senators that he would present a written report to the Parliamentary Commission on the secret security structure within 60 days. I will present to the Commission a very precise report which I have asked the Defence Department to prepare. It is about the activities based on NATO planning that have been started for the eventuality of an attack and occupation of Italy or parts of Italy. As far as I have been informed by the Secret Services, such activities have continued until 1972. After that, it was decided that they were no longer necessary. I will provide the Commission with all the necessary documentation, be it on the problem in general, be it on the specific findings made by Judge Casson in the context of his investigations into the Petiano massacre. Age 71 at the time of his Gladio testimony, Giulio Andreotti is not a regular source by any standards. At the time of his testimony, he looked back on a lifelong political career with probably no parallels in any country of Western Europe. As the leading representative of this conservative Christian Democratic Party, which had functioned as a bulwark against the PCI during the entire Cold War, Andreotti had enjoyed the support of the United States. He personally knew all US presidents and by many within and outside Italy was considered to be the most powerful politician of Italy's First Republic. Although the government in Italy's fragile First Republic had changed in short intervals, Andreotti throughout the Cold War had cunningly managed to remain in power in numerous coalitions and had thus established himself as a dominant presence in the Italian government residence Palazzo Chigi in Rome. Both in Rome, in 1919, Andreotti became Minister of the Interior at the age of 35, and thereafter established an unprecedented record by holding the office of Prime Minister 7 times and serving furthermore 21 times as Minister. of which six times as foreign minister. His admirers compared him with Julius Caesar and called him Divine Julio, while his critics have accused him of being the quintessential backroom wheeler dealer and nicknamed him the Uncle. Allegedly, Andreotti's favourite gangster movie was Goodfellas for Robert De Niro's line, "Never rat on your friends and always keep your mouth shut." Most agree that it was part of Andreotti's strategy which had allowed Divine Julio to survive a large number of Italy's intrigues and crimes, many of which he was directly involved in. By exposing Operation Gladio and the secret armies of NATO, the Uncle had broken his silence. As the First Republic collapsed with the end of the Cold War, powerful Andreotti, then an old man, was dragged in front of numerous courts in Italy which accused him of having manipulated the political institutions, of having cooperated with the mafia, and of having given secret orders according to which opponents were assassinated. The mafia was included in that Paul Williams book I was talking about as well. So it was like a unification of the CIA, MI6, the mafia, Freemasonic lodges, and the Vatican waged like this war against the Italian public all through the Cold War. The justice system has gone crazy. Acting Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi shouted when in November 2002, the appeals court in Perugia sentenced Andreotti for 24 years in prison. As the judges received death threats and were put under police protection, the television channels interrupted their broadcasting on the Italian Football League to report that Andreotti had been found guilty for having given mafia boss Gaetano Badalamenti the order to kill investigative journalist Mino Pecorelli in 1979 in order to cover up the truth on the assassination of Aldo Moro, the chairman of the DO. The Catholic Church attempted to save the reputation of Divine Giulio when Cardinal Fiorenzo Angelini, upon learning the shattering news, declared also Jesus Christ was crucified before his resurrection. Yet despite all the alarm, Andreotti did not end up behind prison bars as the verdicts were overruled in October 2003, and the Uncle walked free. During the first Gladio revelations in front of the Italian senators on August 3rd, 1990, the Uncle had, with reference to the secret stay behind army, cunningly claimed that such activities have continued until 1972 in order to limit the personal damage which loomed. For in 1974, as acting defence minister, Andreotti had gone on the record stating to a judicial inquiry investigating right-wing massacres, "I can say that the head of the Secret Services has repeatedly and unequivocally excluded the existence of a hidden organisation of any type or size." In 1978, he made a similar testimony in front of judges investigating a right-wing bombing in Milan. When the Italian press revealed that the secret Gladio army, far from having been closed down in 1972, was still active, Andreotti's lie collapsed. Thereafter, in August and September 1990, like seldom before during his time in office, Andreotti very actively transferred international messages, searched contacts, and had meetings with numerous ambassadors. As international support was not forthcoming, the Prime Minister, fearing for his power, went into the offensive and attempted to highlight the responsibility of the White House in the United States and numerous other governments in Western Europe, who had all not only conspired in the secret war against the communists, but actively participated in it. In order to draw attention to the involvement of foreign nations, Andreotti employed an effective but somewhat awkward strategy. On October 18th, 1990, he sent his messenger to walk in a great hurry the few steps from the government residence at Palazzo Chigi in Rome to Piazza San Macuto, where the Parliamentary Commission resided. The messenger delivered Andreotti's report entitled The So-Called Parallel SID. The Gladio case, the secretary at this reception of Palazzo Chigi, a member of the Parliamentary Commission, Senator Roberto Ciccio-Messere, heard by coincidence that Andreotti's report had arrived and passed by the secretary at Palazzo Chigi. Upon looking through the text, the senator was mightily surprised, for in it Andreotti provided not only a brief description of Operation Gladio, but contrary to his August 3rd statement, admitted that also that the occult Gladio organisation was still active. Senator Ciccio-Messere asked for a photocopy, yet this was denied, as according to standing procedures, first the president of the commission, Senator Gualtieri, was to read the report. Yet Gualtieri never got to read this version of Andreotti's report on Operation Gladio. exactly when Gualtieri was about to put the sensitive document into his briefcase 3 days later to take it home and read it over the weekend, the telephone rang. And on the phone was the Prime Minister himself, who told the senator they immediately needed his report back because a few passages needed reworking. Gualtieri was annoyed but assented reluctantly and sent the document back to Andreotti's Palazzo Chigi after photocopies had been made. The unusual manoeuvres of Giulio Andreotti sent a roar through Italy and heightened the attention. The newspapers headlined Operation Giulio in a wordplay on Operation Gladio, and between 50,000 and 400,000 annoyed, scared and angry people, organised by the PCI, marched through central Rome in one of the biggest demonstrations in the capital for years, chanting and carrying banners. We want truth. Some marchers dressed up as gladiators, while PCI leader Achille Occhetto told the crowd in the central Piazza del Popolo that this march will force the government to reveal the dark secrets long held back. We are here to obtain truth and transparency. On October 24th, Senator Gualtieri had Andreotti's report on the parallel SID back in his hands. Shortened by 2 pages, this final version was now only 10 pages long. Senator Gualtieri compared it with the photocopies made of the first version and immediately noted that sensitive parts, especially on the international connection, and similar secret organizations in other countries had been cut out. Furthermore, the secret parallel organization, which before had spoken of in the present tense, implying the continuous existence, was now spoken of in the past tense. The awkward strategy of Andreotti to send in a document, withdraw and amend it only to provide it anew could thus hide nothing. Observers agreed that the manoeuvre necessarily drew attention exactly to the amended parts, hence the international dimension of the affair, in order to take away some weight from Andreotti's shoulders, but no international support was forthcoming. In his final report, Andreotti explained that Gladio had been conceived as a network of clandestine resistance within NATO countries to confront an eventual Soviet invasion. After the war, the Italian military secret service, Servizio di Informazioni delle Forze Armate, SIFAR, predecessor of the SID, and the CIA had signed an accord relative to the organisation and activity of the post-occupation clandestine network. An accord commonly referred to as Stay Behind, in which all preceding commitments relevant to matters concerning Italy and the United States were confirmed. The cooperation between the CIA and the Italian military secret service, as Andreotti explained in the document, was supervised and coordinated by secret non-orthodox warfare centres of NATO. Once the clandestine resistance organisation was constituted, Italy was called upon to participate in the works of the CCP, the Clandestine Planning Committee of 1959, operating within the ambit of SHAPE, NATO's Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers, Europe. In 1964, the Italian Secret Service also entered the ACC, Allied Clandestine Committee. Right after World War II, NATO was hiring all these fascists and Nazis that had literally been in the Wehrmacht army or, the SS. The CIA was hiring Geinhard Raylan. They recruited loads of Banderites to London, Canada, and the United States that were involved in the Holocaust. So all of these forces at that time were working together. The ex-fascists of Italy, the Nazis of Germany, the Banderites in Ukraine, and NATO. The secret Gladio army, as Andreotti revealed, was well armed. The equipment provided by the CIA was buried in 139 hiding spots across the country in forests, meadows, and even under churches and cemeteries. According to the explanations of Andreotti, the Gladio caches, including portable arms, ammunition, explosives, hand grenades, knives and daggers, 60mm mortars, several 57mm recoilless rifles, sniper rifles, radio transmitters, binoculars, and various tools. Andreotti's sensational testimony did not only lead to an outcry concerning the corruption of the government and the CIA among the press and the population, but also to a hunt for the secret arms caches. Paget Giuliano recalls the days when the press came to search for the hidden Gladio secrets in his church with ambiguous feelings. I was forewarned in the afternoon when 2 journalists from Il Gazzettino asked me if I knew anything about arms depots here at the church. They started to dig right here and found 2 boxes right away. Then the text also said 30 centimetres from the window. So they came over here and dug down. 1 box was kept inside by them because it contained a phosphorus bomb. They sent the carabinieri outside while 2 experts opened this box. Another had 2 machine guns in it. All the guns were new, in perfect shape. They had never been used. Contrary to the testimony of right-wing terrorist Vince Guerra of the 1980s, Andreotti stressed in his 1990 report that the Italian military secret service in general, as well as the Gladio members in particular, had nothing to do with the terror that Italy had suffered from. He explained that all gladiators before their recruitment had gone through intensive testing and were chosen based on the rigorous application of the Secret Service art to ensure their scrupulous fidelity to the values of the anti-fascist Republican Constitution and to exclude anyone who held administrative or political office. Moreover, the law required that, as Andreotti noted, the pre-selected subjects do not have a penal record, do not partake in active politics, nor participate in any sort of extremist movement. At the same time, Andreotti stressed that the members of the network could not be questioned by judges, and that other member names and further details on the secret army were classified. The operation, on account of its current forms of organisation and application, as foreseen by NATO directives and integrated into its relative planning, is to be carried out and refined in a framework of absolute secrecy. The Andreotti revelations on the parallel SID shocked Italy. For many, a secret CIA NATO army in Italy and beyond seemed hardly credible. Was such a structure at all legal? The Italian daily La Stampa harshly commented, no raison d'etat could be worth maintaining. Covering up or defending a secret military structure composed of ideologically selected members, dependent upon or at least under the influence of a foreign power that allegedly serves as an instrument of political struggle. No definition could be given to it other than high treason and attack on the Constitution. In the Italian Senate, representatives of the Green Party, the Communists, and the Independent Leftist Party accused the government of having used the Gladio units for domestic surveillance and acts of terror to condition the political climate. Above all, the Italian Communist Party was convinced that not foreign armies, but they themselves had been the true target of the Gladio armies during the entire post-war period. Commentators insisted that with this mysterious parallel SID conjured up to head off an impossible coup by the left, we have seriously risked making a coup d'etat by the right possible. We cannot accept that this super SID was passed off as a military instrument destined to operate in case of enemy occupation. The true enemy is only and has always been the Italian Communist Party, i.e. an internal enemy. So much for democracy. Unwilling to shoulder the blame alone, Prime Minister Andreotti, on the very same day that he presented his final Gladio report, stepped in front of the Italian Parliament and declared each chief of government has been informed of the existence of Gladio. This caused massive embarrassment and compromised, among others, former Socialist Prime Minister Bettino Craxi, former Prime Minister Giovanni Spadolini of the Republican Party, who at the time of Andreotti's revelations was President of the Senate, former Prime Minister Arnaldo Forlani, who in 1990 was serving as a secretary of the ruling DCI, and above all, former Prime Minister Francesco Cossiga, who in 1990 was the acting Italian president. The high-ranking magistrates thus drawn into the abyss by Andreotti reacted with confusion. Craxi claimed that he had not been informed until he was confronted with a document on Gladio he had signed himself as Prime Minister. Spadolini and Forlani also suffered from general amnesia, but later had to make smaller amendments to their statements. Spadolini, to the amusement of the Italian public, stressed that there was a difference between what he knew as former Defence Secretary and what he knew as former Prime Minister. Only Francesco Cossiga, Italian president since 1985, proudly confirmed his part in the conspiracy. During an official visit he paid to Scotland, he pointed out that he was proud and happy for his bit in setting the secret army up as junior defence minister of the DCI in the 1950s. He declared that all gladiators were good patriots and testified that I consider it a great privilege and an act of trust that I was chosen for this delicate task. I have to say that I'm proud of the fact that we have kept the secret for 45 years. So that's how bourgeois democracies actually run. They massacre loads of people, keep it secret for half a century, and then when the Cold War's over, they tell people about it. With his embracement of the compromised army linked to terrorism, the president, upon his return to Italy, found himself in the midst of a political storm and requests across parties for his immediate resignation or for his impeachment for high treason. Judge Casson was audacious enough to ask head of state Cossiga to testify in front of the investigating Senate committee. Yet the president, no longer happy, angrily refused and threatened to close down the entire parliamentary Gladio investigation. I'll send the law extending its mandate back to Parliament, and should they reapprove it, I'll have to examine the text of news to see if the conditions exist for the extreme recourse to an absolute, i.e. presidential, refusal to promulgate. The attack was completely without any constitutional grounds, and critics started to question the president's sanity. Cossiga stepped down from the presidency in April 1992, 3 months before his term expired. In a public speech in front of the Italian Senate on November 9th, 1990, Andreotti stressed once again that NATO, the United States, and numerous countries in Western Europe, including Germany, Greece, Denmark, and Belgium, have been involved in the stay-behind conspiracy. To prove this point, classified data was leaked to the press, and the Italian political magazine Panorama published the entire document. The parallel SID, Operation Gladio, which Andreotti had handed to the Parliamentary Commission when France tried to deny its involvement in the international Gladio network. Andreotti mercilessly declared that France, as well, had secretly participated in the most recent Gladio ACC meeting, which had taken place in Brussels but a few weeks ago on October 23rd and 24th, 1990. Thereupon, somewhat embarrassed, also France confirmed that it had been involved in Gladio. The international dimension of the secret war could no longer be denied, and the military scandal swept across Western Europe. Following the geographical zones of NATO membership, it thereafter crossed the Atlantic and also reached the United States. An Italian parliamentary commission investigating Gladio and the Italian massacres in 2000 concluded those massacres, those bombs, those military actions had been organised or promoted or supported by men inside Italian state institutions, and has been discovered more recently by men linked to the structures of United States intelligence. And that ends chapter 1. I will be reading chapter 2 probably tomorrow, so tune in for that if you like. Give a like and subscribe and that, and share around if you fancy. Cheers.